If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. The words hung in the air like smoke from a blown-out candle, bitter and suffocating. My mother, Patricia, delivered them with that signature smirk of hers, the one she reserved for her most cutting observations. The mashed potatoes were still steaming on my fork halfway to my mouth when she decided to serve up that particular slice of cruelty for dessert. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because in that moment, something inside me shifted. Something that had been bending for 26 years finally snapped back into place. My name is Alex Thompson, and I'm speaking to you from my office in downtown Portland, Oregon, where the rain taps against floor-to-ceiling windows and the city lights blur into watercolor streaks. This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the best response to being invisible is to disappear on your own terms. The Thompson family dinner table had always been a battlefield disguised as mahogany. Sunday evenings at 6 sharp, we'd gather in our suburban Beaverton home, where the wallpaper hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration, and the chandelier cast shadows that seemed to highlight every fault line in our fractured family. Dynamic. That particular October evening, the one that would change everything, started like any other. Mom had prepared her usual overcooked roast beef. Dad was already 3 beers deep into forgetting his week, and my siblings, Jessica and Mike, were engaged in their typical competition for parental attention. I had rushed in 15 minutes late, still wearing my Thompson Tech Solutions polo shirt, the one with the frayed collar that I'd been meaning to replace for months, but never had the time. My hair was pulled back in the same messy bun I'd worn for the past 3 days, and I could feel the exhaustion radiating from every pore. I'd spent the weekend troubleshooting a server crash for our biggest client, sleeping maybe 4 hours total, living on gas station coffee and the stale granola bars I kept in my desk drawer. "Nice of you to join us, Alexandra," Mom said, using my full name like a weapon. She only called me Alexandra when she was preparing to remind me of my many shortcomings. "We were just discussing Jessica's promotion." Of course they were. Jessica, my younger sister by 2 years, had just been made assistant manager at the boutique marketing firm where she worked. It was her 3rd job in 2 years, each one secured through a connection Mom had cultivated at her book club or garden society meetings. Jessica possessed that effortless charm that made people want to help her, combined with the kind of beauty that photographs well and opens doors. She was everything I wasn't: polished, confident, and completely incapable of fixing a computer if her life depended on it. "Tell Alex about the company car," Dad encouraged, his voice carrying that note of pride I'd stopped hoping to hear directed at me years ago. Robert Thompson was a man who measured success in visible symbols: cars, clothes, job titles that sounded impressive at neighborhood barbecues. The fact that his oldest daughter spent her days elbow-deep in hard drives and server racks wasn't the kind of accomplishment he could brag about to his golf buddies. Jessica launched into a detailed description of her new silver Audi A4, complete with heated seats and premium sound system. She pulled out her phone to show us pictures, the screen reflecting the diamond earrings that had been her birthday gift from our parents. 24 years old and already collecting luxury items like participation trophies, while I drove a 2010 Honda Civic with a check engine light that had been on for so long, I'd started thinking of it as a dashboard decoration. "It's really not that big of a deal," Jessica said with false modesty, the kind that makes the achievement sound even more impressive. "I mean, I'm just grateful for the opportunity. Mr. Davidson says I have real potential in client relations." Mike, our youngest at 22, jumped in with his own news about being accepted into a graduate program in environmental science. Full scholarship, he announced, because his undergraduate GPA had been pristine and his thesis on sustainable urban development had caught the attention of several professors. Mike was the intellectual of the family, the one who would change the world through research and policy. He spoke in careful, measured sentences, and had never met a cause he couldn't champion with academic precision. I listened to their updates, while mechanically cutting my roast beef into smaller and smaller pieces, the silence stretching around my absence from the conversation like a moat. Nobody asked about my week, about the 16-hour days I'd been pulling to keep Thompson Tech Solutions afloat, about the new cybersecurity certification I'd earned that would save the company thousands in outsourcing fees. Nobody mentioned that our biggest client had specifically requested me for their account, or that I'd just landed 3 new contracts that would secure our revenue through the next fiscal year. Thompson Tech Solutions was supposed to be Dad's legacy project, the business he'd started after getting laid off from Intel 7 years ago. In reality, it had become my full-time job while he played the role of owner, and I handled everything from client intake to financial management. I wrote the proposals, managed the schedules, fixed the computers, balanced the books, and somehow still found time to teach part-time computer literacy classes at the local community college to bring in extra income. Alex has been working so hard lately, Mom said, and for a moment I thought she might actually acknowledge my contributions. But I worry she's becoming too focused on work. It's not healthy for a young woman to be so. She paused, searching for the right word. Intense about technology. Men don't find that attractive. There it was. The subtle redirect that managed to dismiss both my professional achievements and my personal worth in a single breath. Because in Patricia Thompson's worldview, everything a woman did should ultimately serve the purpose of making her more appealing to potential husbands. Jessica's marketing job was acceptable because it involved social skills and creativity. Mike's environmental work was admirable because it demonstrated intelligence and compassion. But my technical expertise was somehow unfeminine, a character flaw that needed correction rather than a skill set that kept their family business operational. I'm not trying to be attractive to anyone right now, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm trying to build something sustainable. Well, that's part of the problem, Dad chimed in, apparently oblivious to how his words landed. You spend so much time with computers, you forget how to talk to actual people. When's the last time you went on a date, or even out with friends? The question hit like a physical blow because he was right, but not for the reasons he thought. I didn't have time for dating or socializing because I was too busy ensuring his business didn't collapse. Every evening he spent watching television or working in his garage workshop was an evening I spent responding to client emails, updating security patches, or researching new service offerings. Every weekend my siblings used for rest and recreation was a weekend I spent in the office, maintaining systems and preparing for Monday morning crisis calls. I have friends, I said weakly, thinking of Sarah Chen, my former classmate who now worked as a project manager at a downtown tech startup. We grabbed coffee maybe once a month when our schedules aligned, conversations that mainly consisted of her encouraging me to leave the family business and me explaining why I couldn't abandon the people who depended on me. Work friends don't count, Jessica added helpfully. You need to get out there, meet people in different circles. Maybe try that dating app I told you about. Emma from my yoga class met her fiancé through it. Mike nodded sagely. Studies show that diverse social networks contribute significantly to both mental health and career advancement. You're limiting your potential by staying in such a narrow professional bubble. I wanted to scream that my professional bubble was paying for Mike's textbooks and Jessica's weekend shopping trips, that my narrow focus was the reason Dad's business credit score had improved enough to secure the equipment loans that kept us competitive, that my antisocial tendencies were actually antisocial sacrifices, time and energy I gave up, so the rest of them could pursue their dreams without worrying about keeping the lights on. Instead, I took another bite of overcooked beef and asked Mike about his thesis research. Better to let them shine than to dim their light with my resentment. I'd learned that lesson years ago, around the time I realized that my family's love came with conditions I could never quite meet. The conversation flowed around me for another 30 minutes, touching on Jessica's new apartment in the trendy Pearl District, Mike's plans for a summer internship with an environmental nonprofit, and Dad's latest project restoring a vintage motorcycle. Normal family stuff, the kind of easy interaction that looked warm and functional from the outside. Mom played the perfect hostess, refilling glasses and asking follow-up questions that demonstrated her engagement with her children's lives. At least, with two of her children's lives. I was clearing the salad plates when Mom made her observation about my theoretical disappearance. The words came out casually, almost thoughtfully, as if she were commenting on the weather or the new neighbor's landscaping choices. You know, Alex, sometimes I think you're so wrapped up in your little computer world that you've forgotten how to be part of a real family. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. You're like a ghost in your own life. The plate in my hands didn't shatter, though part of me expected it to. Instead, I set it down carefully on the sideboard and turned to face her. Jessica and Mike had gone quiet, their eyes focused on their phones in that way people do when they want to avoid acknowledging an uncomfortable moment. Dad was studying his beer bottle label with intense concentration. "You're probably right," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "I have been pretty invisible around here." Mom's smirk widened slightly, pleased that I'd agreed with her assessment. She probably expected an apology, maybe a promise to be more social, more present, more like the daughter she actually wanted. Instead, I smiled back at her, the same polite smile I used with difficult clients who didn't understand why their computer problems weren't my fault. "I think I'm going to head home early tonight," I continued, untying the apron I'd put on to help with dishes. "I have some work to catch up on." "Of course you do," Mom sighed dramatically. "Work, work, work. That's all you ever think about. No wonder you can't maintain a relationship." I nodded as if she'd made a valid point rather than taken another casual swipe at my personal life. "You're absolutely right. I do think about work a lot. Probably more than I should." I kissed Dad's forehead, hugged Jessica and Mike, and thanked Mom for dinner with the same gracious tone I'd been using since childhood. Nothing in my demeanor suggested that anything had changed, that her words had landed differently this time. I collected my purse and jacket, said goodnight to everyone, and walked out to my car like I had dozens of times before. But as I sat in the driveway, key in the ignition, staring at the warm yellow light spilling from the dining room window, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Mom was right about one thing. I had become invisible in my own life. I'd been so focused on being useful, on being the dependable daughter who solved problems and kept everyone's world running smoothly, that I'd forgotten to actually live. The revelation wasn't devastating. It was clarifying. For years, I'd been operating under the assumption that my value came from my utility, that love was something I earned through sacrifice and service. But sitting there in the darkness, watching my family continue their evening without me, I realized that I'd been playing a game with rules nobody else was following. I drove home to my small apartment in Cedar Heights, a modest complex about 15 minutes from both the family house and the office. The rent was reasonable. The neighbors were quiet, and it had the fastest internet connection I could afford. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The walls were painted a soft gray I'd chosen myself, and I'd slowly been furnishing it with pieces that made me happy, rather than pieces that made sense to other people. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop, not to work on client projects, but to do something I'd been avoiding for months. I opened a new document and started typing a business plan. Not for Thompson Tech Solutions, but for something entirely my own. Phoenix Digital, I called it, specializing in cybersecurity consulting and data recovery for small to medium-sized businesses. The name felt right. Phoenix. Rising from ashes. Beginning again. I'd been thinking about going independent for over a year, ever since Sarah had mentioned that her company was looking for specialized contractors for sensitive projects. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I had the certifications, the experience, and a growing network of contacts who trusted my work. What I'd been lacking was the courage to step away from the safety of family employment, even when that employment meant working twice as hard for half the recognition. But Mom's words had given me an unexpected gift. If I was already invisible, if my disappearance wouldn't even be noticed, then I had nothing to lose by actually disappearing. By taking my skills, my client relationships, and my exhausted dedication somewhere they might be appreciated. I worked until 3 a.m, building a framework for my exit strategy. Not an angry departure, but a professional transition that would protect the clients I cared about while freeing me from the family dynamics that had been slowly suffocating my potential. I researched office spaces, calculated startup costs, and drafted a resignation letter that was courteous, thorough, and completely non-negotiable. By the time I finally went to bed, I wasn't angry anymore. I was excited. For the first time in years, I was thinking about my future instead of everyone else's present. And it felt like waking up from a dream I hadn't realized I was having. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that comes from finally making a decision you've been avoiding. I got dressed in my best professional attire, not the polo shirt uniform of Thompson Tech Solutions, but the navy blazer and fitted pants I usually reserved for client meetings. I did my hair properly, put on makeup, and looked in the mirror, at a version of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. I had some phone calls to make. The first call I made was to David Rodriguez, a business attorney who'd helped one of our clients with a contract dispute 6 months earlier. I'd been impressed by his straightforward approach and the way he explained complex legal concepts without condescension. When his receptionist put me through, David remembered me immediately. "Alex, good to hear from you. How's everything at Thompson Tech? That client we helped with the vendor agreement has been singing your praises." "That's actually what I'm calling about," I said, settling into my desk chair at the office. It was 7:30 in the morning, an hour before anyone else would arrive. I'm considering starting my own consulting practice, and I need to understand my legal obligations regarding client relationships and non-compete agreements. There was a pause. Then David's voice took on a more serious tone. "I see. Are we talking about a hypothetical transition, or something more immediate?" "More immediate," I admitted. "I've been doing some research, and I think I'm ready to make the move. But I want to do it correctly, without burning bridges or creating legal complications." David scheduled me for a consultation that afternoon. I spent the morning handling routine client calls and system maintenance, operating on autopilot while my mind raced through the implications of what I was planning. Every interaction with Dad felt loaded with subtext now. When he asked me to handle a quote for a potential new client, I found myself wondering if he'd even notice when those quotes started coming from Phoenix Digital instead of Thompson Tech Solutions. The legal consultation went better than I'd hoped. David explained that since I'd never signed a formal non-compete agreement with the family business, I was free to pursue independent clients as long as I didn't actively solicit Thompson Tech's existing customers. The ethical approach, he suggested, would be to give proper notice and offer to transition my clients smoothly to ensure continuity of service. "The tricky part," David noted, "is that you've been essentially running the business, operations. Your departure is going to create a significant gap that won't be easy to fill quickly." "That's not my responsibility to solve," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I've been trying to train other people to handle these tasks for years. The fact that nobody wanted to learn isn't something I can fix by staying indefinitely." David smiled. "You sound like someone who's thought this through carefully. My advice is to document everything you can before you leave. Create procedures, manuals, password lists, client contact information. It protects both you and them, and it demonstrates good faith." I spent the next 2 weeks creating the most comprehensive transition documentation in the history of small business. Every client file, Every recurring maintenance schedule, every vendor relationship was meticulously recorded and organized. I updated passwords, created step-by-step troubleshooting guides, and even recorded video tutorials for the more complex procedures. If someone wanted to continue my work, they'd have everything they needed to succeed. The hardest part was maintaining normalcy during family interactions. The following Sunday dinner was an exercise in self-control as I listened to Jessica describe her latest work drama, and Mike discuss his research project, while Mom made her usual subtle comments about my social life. Dad mentioned that he was thinking about expanding the business, maybe hiring another technician to handle some of the workload. "That's a great idea," I said encouragingly. "It would be smart to cross-train someone on the client management side, too. Just in case." "Just in case what?" Dad asked, looking puzzled. "Just in case someone gets sick or wants to take a vacation or decides to pursue other opportunities," I said casually. "It's always good to have backup systems in place." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "You're probably right. Maybe you could help train someone new. You know the systems better than anyone." The irony wasn't lost on me. He was asking me to train my own replacement without realizing it. I agreed to help with the hiring process, knowing it would make my eventual departure easier for everyone to handle. During those 2 weeks, I also started reaching out to my professional network. Sarah Chen was my first real conversation about Phoenix Digital. We met at Grind Coffee, our usual spot in the Hawthorne district, on a rainy Thursday evening after her workday ended. "I've been wondering when you'd finally make this call," Sarah said after I explained my plans. "Honestly, I'm surprised you lasted this long. The way your family talks about your work, you'd think you were just playing around with computers as a hobby." "They don't mean to be dismissive," I said automatically, then caught myself. "Actually, maybe they do mean it. I've been making excuses for them for so long I'm not even sure anymore." Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. "Alex, I've been in tech for 8 years, and I've never met anyone with your combination of technical skills and client management abilities. You're wasted at that family business. You know it, I know it. And frankly, anyone with eyes can see it." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "I'm going to give you 3 names, companies that have been asking me if I know any good independent cybersecurity consultants. The demand is crazy right now, especially for someone who can speak both technical and business language fluently." The first name she gave me was Emma Martinez, IT director for a mid-sized law firm that had been dealing with increasing security threats. The second was Tom Wilson, operations manager for a nonprofit that needed to overhaul their entire digital infrastructure. The third was a startup in the Pearl District that was growing faster than their technical capabilities could. "Call Emma first," Sarah advised. "Her firm just went through a data breach scare, and their current IT contractor basically told them to buy new everything instead of fixing what they had. She's frustrated and looking for someone who can actually solve problems instead of just selling expensive solutions." I called Emma the next morning and scheduled a consultation for the following week. Her office was in a converted warehouse building downtown, all exposed brick and polished concrete floors. She met me in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. Emma was about my age, with short black hair and the kind of direct communication style I appreciated in technical discussions. She explained their situation without sugarcoating the problems. Their previous contractor had been recommending a complete system replacement that would cost over $100,000 and require weeks of downtime. "The thing is," Emma said, "our current system isn't that old. It's just not configured properly for our security needs. We handle sensitive client information, so we need bulletproof protection, but we can't afford to replace everything every time there's a new threat." I spent 2 hours reviewing their setup, identifying vulnerabilities, and proposing solutions. That would cost about 20% of their previous quote while providing better security than a complete replacement. Emma's relief was visible. "This is exactly what we needed," she said as I packed up my laptop. "Someone who understands that the goal is solving problems, not selling products. When can you start?" "I'll need about 2 more weeks to finish up some obligations," I said carefully. "But after that, I'm available." Emma handed me a business card with her direct number written on the back. "Call me the day you're ready. We'll have a contract waiting." The consultation with Tom Wilson went equally well. His nonprofit was struggling with an aging network that couldn't handle their growing staff and expanding programs. Their budget was tight, but their needs were clear. I proposed a phased upgrade plan that would improve functionality immediately while spreading costs over 6 months. "You know what I like about your approach?" Tom said as we finished our meeting. "You're not trying to impress me with how complicated everything is. You're explaining things in a way that actually makes sense." By the end of that week, I had verbal commitments for 3 major projects that would generate more income in 6 months than I typically saw in a year at Thompson Tech Solutions. More importantly, these clients were excited to work with me specifically, not just grateful for generic technical support. The momentum was building, but I still needed to have the conversation I'd been dreading. Friday evening, I stayed late at the Thompson Tech office to finalize my resignation letter and transition documents. Dad usually left by 5, but he surprised me by coming back around 7 to pick up some files he'd forgotten. "Working late again?" he asked, settling into his desk chair. "You know, Alex, sometimes I worry that you're pushing yourself too hard. This business is important, but it's not worth sacrificing your health." The concern in his voice was genuine, which somehow made everything more complicated. It would have been easier if he were a villain instead of just someone who'd taken my contributions for granted without meaning to. "Dad, can we talk about something?" I said, closing my laptop and turning to face him. "I've been thinking about making some changes in my career direction." His expression shifted from casual concern to focused attention. "What kind of changes?" "I want to start my own consulting practice. I've been developing the business plan, and I think I'm ready to make the transition." Dad was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd said. "You want to leave Thompson Tech?" "I want to build something of my own," I said carefully. "Something where I can use all the skills I've developed and grow in directions that interest me. I've learned so much working here, but I think it's time for me to challenge myself in new ways." "But you are Thompson Tech," Dad said, and for the first time, I heard real panic in his voice. "I mean, you handle everything. The clients trust you. The systems run because you maintain them. How would we even function without you?" There it was. The acknowledgement I'd been waiting for my entire adult life, delivered as a desperate attempt to keep me from leaving. After years of being treated like the family tech support person, suddenly, I was indispensable. The timing would have been funny if it weren't so heartbreaking. "You'd function the same way every other small business functions," I said gently. "By hiring qualified people and training them properly. By creating systems that don't depend on one person knowing everything. By treating technology as a professional discipline instead of something that just happens automatically." Dad ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from my childhood when he was trying to solve problems he didn't fully understand. "What would it take to keep you? A raise? A different title? Partnership in the business?" "It's not about money or titles," I said, though the offer of partnership after all these years was particularly ironic. "It's about building something that's mine. About working with clients who chose me specifically, not just whoever happened to be available. About having my contributions recognized and valued instead of taken for granted." "We do value your contributions," Dad protested. I thought about Sunday dinner, about Mom's casual dismissal of my work, about Jessica's car and Mike's tuition, and all the ways my earnings had been redirected to support other people's dreams while my own remained. Unspoken, "I know you do, in your way," I said. "But I need something different now. I need to prove to myself that I can succeed independently." Dad was quiet again, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his expression was a mixture of pride and resignation. "How long do I have to find someone to replace you?" "I'm planning to submit my official resignation on Monday with 4 weeks' notice. I've created comprehensive documentation for all the client accounts and procedures. I'll train whoever you hire, and I'll make sure the transition is as smooth as possible." 4 weeks, Dad repeated. "That's not very long to find someone with your expertise." "It's longer than most people give," I pointed out. "And honestly, you don't need to find someone with my exact expertise. You need to find someone who can grow into the role, the same way I did." We talked for another hour, covering practical details about client handoffs and system access. Dad asked intelligent questions about the documentation I'd prepared and seemed genuinely interested in understanding the scope of responsibilities he'd need to delegate. For the first time in years, we were having a real business conversation, treating each other as professionals rather than family members with complicated emotional baggage. When I finally left the office that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. The hardest conversation was behind me, and Dad had handled it better than I'd expected. He wasn't happy about my decision, but he understood it. More importantly, he was already thinking practically about how to move forward instead of trying to guilt me into staying. The weekend brought the conversation I'd been dreading even more than the one with Dad. Sunday dinner was going to be interesting. I arrived exactly on time, wearing the same professional outfit I'd worn to my client meetings that week. Mom noticed immediately. "You look nice, dear. Job interview?" "Not exactly," I said, accepting the glass of wine Dad offered me. "But I do have some news to share with everyone." Jessica and Mike looked up from their phones with the kind of mild interest they usually reserved for family announcements. Dad caught my eye and nodded slightly, a signal that he'd let me control how much information to share. "I've decided to start my own consulting business," I said simply. "I'll be leaving Thompson Tech Solutions in 4 weeks to focus on Phoenix Digital." The silence that followed was profound. Mom's fork suspended halfway to her mouth, Jessica's eyes widened with surprise, and Mike actually put down his phone to give me his full attention. "Your own business?" Mom said finally. "Alex, that seems very risky. What if it doesn't work out? What if you can't find clients?" "I already have clients," I said calmly. 3 major contracts lined up with more in development. The demand for specialized cybersecurity consulting is strong right now." "But why leave the family business?" Jessica asked. "I mean, couldn't you just do consulting on the side?" Dad answered before I could. "Because she's outgrown what we can offer her here. This is a chance for Alex to build something significant." I looked at him with surprise and gratitude. He understood, even if he wasn't happy about it. Mike leaned forward with interest. "What kind of consulting? Are you focusing on specific industries or technologies?" For the next 20 minutes, I found myself having the kind of detailed professional conversation with my family that I'd never experienced before. Mike asked thoughtful questions about cybersecurity trends and regulatory compliance. Jessica was curious about the business development side and shared some insights from her marketing experience. Even Dad contributed ideas about service packaging and client relationship management. Mom remained mostly quiet, occasionally asking questions about practical concerns like health insurance and retirement planning. Her worry was obvious, but she didn't voice the kinds of dismissive comments I'd been expecting. "I'm proud of you," Dad said as we finished dessert. "Scared as hell about how I'm going to replace you, but proud. This takes real courage." "You raised me to be independent," I said, looking around the table. "This is what independence looks like." Mom finally spoke up. I suppose it is. I just hope you know what you're doing. I don't, completely, I admitted. But I know enough to get started, and I'm willing to learn the rest as I go. That's how every successful business begins. Jessica raised her wine glass. To Phoenix Digital, and to my sister, who apparently has been hiding her entrepreneurial ambitions from us. We toasted my new venture, and for the first time in years, I felt like a full participant in family conversation rather than an observer. They were seeing me differently now, not as the quiet tech support daughter, but as someone with vision and ambition. It was a strange and wonderful feeling. The drive home that night was contemplative. I'd expected resistance, guilt trips, maybe even anger about my decision to leave the family business. Instead, I'd received support and encouragement. It made me wonder how many of my assumptions about their feelings toward me had been colored by my own insecurities rather than their actual attitudes. But even if they were supportive now, the years of feeling invisible and undervalued had already done their work. I was ready to build something new, something that belonged entirely to me. The approval was nice, but it wasn't necessary anymore. I'd already learned to approve of myself. Monday morning brought the official resignation letter, typed on professional letterhead, and delivered with copies of all transition documentation. Dad read it carefully, signed his acknowledgement, and shook my hand like I was a business partner rather than his daughter. 4 weeks to the day, he said. Then you're officially a competitor. The best kind of competitor, I replied. The kind that refers clients when they're outside my specialty area. He laughed. I'll hold you to that. The word spread quickly, through our professional network. By Wednesday, I had 3 more consultation requests and 2 offers to subcontract on larger projects. By Friday, Emma Martinez had called to ask if I could start earlier than planned. I know you said 4 weeks, she said, but we just had another security incident. Nothing major, but it's got everyone nervous. Any chance you could at least do an assessment before your official start date? I spent Saturday morning at Emma's law firm conducting a comprehensive security audit that identified 12 potential vulnerabilities and provided immediate fixes for the most critical issues. Emma watched me work with the kind of attention that made it clear she was evaluating my methods as much as my results. You see problems differently than other consultants we've worked with, she observed as I explained my findings. You're looking at the whole system, not just individual components. That's because most security breaches happen at the intersection points, I said. The places where different systems meet and create gaps in coverage. You can have the best firewall in the world, but if your email server isn't properly configured, it doesn't matter. Emma nodded slowly. Our previous consultant never explained it like that. He just kept recommending more expensive equipment. I handed her a detailed report with prioritized recommendations and cost estimates. Equipment is part of the solution, but it's not the whole solution. You need strategy, training, and ongoing monitoring. The goal is creating a security culture, not just buying security products. She flipped through the report, pausing at the summary page. This is incredibly thorough, and these costs are about 60% less than what we were quoted before. Because I'm solving the actual problems instead of selling you a premium package, I said. Your current infrastructure is solid. It just needs to be optimized and properly configured. Emma closed the report and looked at me directly. I want to offer you something beyond our initial contract. We have 2 partner firms that are dealing with similar security challenges. Would you be interested in consulting for a small network of legal practices? It could be a steady revenue stream while you're building your client base. The offer was even better than I'd hoped. 3 established clients, predictable income, and the kind of professional reputation that would attract additional business. I accepted immediately. Walking back to my car, I felt the satisfaction that comes from solving complex problems and being genuinely appreciated for the solution. This was what I'd been missing at Thompson Tech Solutions. Not just the recognition, but the opportunity to work with clients who understood the value of what I was providing. That evening, I called Sarah to update her on the week's developments. She laughed when I described Emma's expansion offer. "I told you the demand was crazy," she said. "Good cybersecurity people who can actually communicate with non-technical clients are incredibly rare. You're going to be booked solid within 6 months." "It's starting to feel real," I admitted. "Like this might actually work." "Of course, it's going to work," Sarah said. "The only question is how big you want to build it. Are you thinking solo practice or eventually hiring other consultants?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on establishing independence that I hadn't thought about growth beyond myself. But the idea was intriguing. Phoenix Digital as a firm rather than just a consulting practice. "I think I'll start solo and see how it develops," I said. "But I like the idea of building something larger eventually." "Keep me in mind when you're ready to expand," Sarah said. "I love my current job, but the idea of working with you is tempting. Especially if you keep landing clients like Emma's. Firm." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment's small living room and tried to process how much my life had changed in 3 weeks. A month ago, I'd been the invisible daughter, working endless hours for minimal recognition. Now, I was a business owner with clients, growth opportunities, and colleagues who wanted to work with me. The transformation hadn't required any dramatic confrontations or burned bridges. It had simply required the courage to value myself enough to leave a situation that wasn't serving me, regardless of how comfortable and familiar it had become. Looking back, Mom's cruel comment at dinner had been a gift, though she'd never intended it that way. It had forced me to confront the reality that I'd already disappeared from my own life. The only question was whether I'd stay invisible or choose to reappear somewhere else entirely. I chose reappearance. And it was glorious. 3 weeks into my notice period at Thompson Tech Solutions, the reality of my departure began hitting the family in waves that I hadn't anticipated. Dad had started the hiring process, posting job listings and conducting interviews, but every candidate seemed to highlight just how much specialized knowledge I'd accumulated over the years. The first interview was with a recent computer science graduate who had impressive technical credentials but no client management experience. "He knows programming languages I've never heard of," Dad told me after the interview. But when I asked him about handling an angry customer whose system crashed during tax season, he looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. The second candidate was a veteran IT support specialist with excellent people skills but limited experience with the specific software platforms our clients used. The third had cybersecurity expertise, but wanted to completely overhaul our service model in ways that would alienate our existing customer base. "I'm beginning to understand why you were handling so many different aspects of the business," Dad said on Friday afternoon, reviewing resumes at his desk while I finished updating client files. "I thought we just needed to find someone good with computers. I didn't realize how much relationship management and business strategy was involved." I looked up from the server documentation I was creating. That's why it took me 3 years to get comfortable with all of it. The technical stuff is learnable, but understanding each client's specific needs and communication style takes time. "Time we don't have," Dad said with a sigh. "Some of these clients have been with us since we started. They're going to notice when their usual contact person disappears." The weight of guilt tried to settle on my shoulders the way it had for years whenever family members expressed stress about business concerns. But this time, I recognized the feeling and consciously set it aside. I'd given 4 weeks' notice and created comprehensive transition materials. The difficulty of replacing me wasn't my problem to solve, especially since I'd been suggesting cross-training and documentation improvements for years. Maybe the solution isn't finding one person to do everything I was doing, I suggested. Maybe it's restructuring the roles so the workload is distributed more efficiently. Dad considered this. "You mean hire multiple people? Or partner with other local consultants for specialized projects? You don't need a full-time cybersecurity." Expert if you can contract with one when clients have specific needs. Same with training or system design projects. It was strange to be consulting on the future of Thompson Tech Solutions while simultaneously planning my departure from it. But I genuinely wanted Dad's business to succeed, even if I wouldn't be part of it. The fact that he was finally asking for my strategic input, treating me as a business advisor rather than just technical support, felt like validation I'd been seeking for years. During my final week, something unexpected happened. Mom started paying attention to my work in ways she never had before. She'd always dismissed my technical career as something she couldn't understand and therefore didn't need to value. But now that I was leaving to start my own company, she seemed curious about what exactly I did all day. "Can you explain to me what cybersecurity consulting actually involves?" she asked on Tuesday evening when I stopped by the house to return some equipment. "I mean, in terms I can understand." I was so surprised by the question that I almost didn't know how to respond. Mom had never asked about my work before, beyond general inquiries about whether I was still playing with computers. "Think of it like being a security consultant for buildings," I said, settling into the kitchen chair across from her. "Businesses have valuable information that needs protection, the same way buildings have valuable contents that need protection. My job is to assess their current security measures, identify vulnerabilities, and design systems to prevent unauthorized access." Mom nodded thoughtfully. "So you're like a detective and a security guard combined." "That's actually a pretty good analogy," I said, warming to the subject. "I look for potential problems before they happen, and I design systems to prevent or respond to security breaches." "And companies pay well for this service?" "Very well, especially if you can prove that your recommendations actually work. The cost of preventing a data breach is usually much less than the cost of recovering from one." Mom was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "I had no idea there was so much strategy involved. I always thought you were just fixing broken computers." The admission stung a little, confirming what I'd suspected about her perception of my work. But there was something else in her tone now, something that sounded almost like respect. "A lot of it is problem-solving and strategic thinking," I said. "The technical skills are important, but understanding business operations and human behavior is just as crucial." "You sound like you really love what you do," Mom observed. "I do, especially when I'm working with clients who appreciate the value of what I'm providing." She caught the implication in that statement. "And you didn't feel appreciated here?" It wasn't a question, so I didn't answer directly. Instead, I said, "I think sometimes families take each other's contributions for granted. It's natural, but it can be limiting for everyone involved." Mom was quiet again, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than usual. "I think I owe you an apology, Alex. I said some things at dinner a few weeks ago that were unkind and untrue." The acknowledgement caught me off guard. "You don't need to apologize, Mom." "Yes, I do. I said no one would notice if you disappeared, but that was wrong. We're all noticing now, and we're realizing how much we relied on you without acknowledging it." There was genuine remorse in her voice, and for the first time in years, I felt like she was seeing me as a complete person, rather than just the daughter who didn't quite meet her expectations. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, "but honestly, I needed to leave regardless of how anyone felt about it. This isn't about proving a point or getting recognition. It's about building something that's mine." Mom nodded. "I'm beginning to understand that. And I'm proud of you for having the courage to do it, even if it scares me a little." The conversation was interrupted by Jessica arriving home from work, full of excitement about a new marketing campaign she was developing. As she described, her project. I noticed something different in how Mom responded to her. There were still the usual enthusiastic questions and encouragement, but there was also a new awareness that professional accomplishments required real skill and effort. After Jessica finished her update, Mom turned to me. "Alex, Would you tell us more about this Phoenix digital business? I'd like to understand what you're building. So I found myself explaining my business plan to my family in detail for the first time. I described the client base I was targeting, the services I planned to offer, and the growth strategy I'd developed. Jessica asked thoughtful questions about marketing and brand positioning. Even Mike contributed insights about sustainable business practices and long-term planning. It was the kind of family conversation I'd always wanted to have about my work, and it was happening just as I was leaving to pursue it independently. The timing was bittersweet, but it felt like a form of closure. The next day brought an unexpected challenge. Mrs. Henderson, one of our longest-standing clients, called with a crisis. Her law practice's email server had been compromised, and she was panicking about potential data exposure. Dad was in interviews all morning, so I took the call. "Alex, thank goodness you're there," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice tight with stress. "My assistant tried to access email this morning and got some kind of warning about unauthorized access. I don't understand what's happening, but I'm terrified that client information has been stolen." I grabbed my emergency kit and drove to her office immediately. The situation was serious, but not catastrophic. Someone had gained access to one email account through a phishing attack, but the damage was contained because of security measures I'd implemented 6 months earlier. "The good news is that your client files are safe," I told Mrs. Henderson after isolating the compromised account and running a full security scan. "The intruder only had access to that one email account, and I can see exactly what they accessed. It was mostly routine correspondence, nothing sensitive." Mrs. Henderson's relief was visible. "How can you be sure?" I walked her through the security logs, explaining in simple terms how the monitoring systems worked and what the data showed. "We're going to change all your passwords, update your security settings, and add two-factor authentication to prevent this from happening again." The resolution took 3 hours, but by the end, Mrs. Henderson's systems were more secure than they'd been before the attack. As I packed up my equipment, she grabbed my arm. "Alex, I heard you're leaving Thompson Tech to start your own business. I want you to know that you'll always have my firm as a client. Bob is a good man, but you're the one who really understands our needs." The comment was flattering, but also complicated. Mrs. Henderson had been one of my favorite clients, and the idea of continuing to work with her was appealing. But I also didn't want to actively poach Thompson Tech's customers. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Henderson. Let's see how the transition goes with whoever Dad hires. If there are specific projects that require specialized expertise, maybe we can work something out that benefits everyone." When I returned to the office, Dad was waiting with a mixture of relief and concern. "Mrs. Henderson called to thank me for sending you out so quickly. She also mentioned that she'd be interested in continuing to work with you directly." "I told her we'd see how the transition develops," I said carefully. "I'm not trying to steal your clients, Dad." "I know you're not, but I'm also starting to realize that some of these relationships are more personal than I understood. People don't just trust Thompson Tech Solutions, they trust you specifically." It was a recognition that made my departure feel more significant, but also more necessary. If I was going to have that kind of professional credibility, I wanted it attached to my own brand rather than someone else's business. The final week at Thompson Tech Solutions passed quickly. Dad had decided to hire 2 people instead of trying to find one person to fill my role completely. Marcus Chen, a recent graduate with strong technical skills, would handle system maintenance and basic troubleshooting. Linda Rodriguez, an experienced project manager, would focus on client relationships and business operations. I spent my last few days training both of them, creating detailed handoff documents for each major client, and ensuring that all systems were documented and accessible. Marcus was eager to learn and asked thoughtful questions about troubleshooting strategies. Linda had excellent people skills and quickly grasped the importance of understanding each client's communication preferences. "You've built something really impressive here," Linda told me as we reviewed client files together. The relationships you've developed with these businesses are remarkable. They really trust your judgment. That trust took years to build, I said. But it's also transferable if you focus on solving their problems rather than just providing services. On my last day, Dad surprised me with a small office farewell gathering. Nothing elaborate, just coffee and pastries in the conference room with the new team members and a few of our regular vendors who happened to be in the building. Tom Wilson from the nonprofit I'd consulted with the previous month stopped by to wish me well. "I wanted to thank you again for the network assessment," Tom said. "Your recommendations saved us thousands of dollars and gave us a roadmap for growth that actually makes sense." The comment sparked a conversation about Phoenix Digital's approach to consulting, and I found myself explaining my business philosophy to a room full of people who understood and appreciated it. Dad listened, with obvious pride, and I realized that despite the complications of family business dynamics, he'd always respected my technical expertise. He just hadn't known how to express that respect in ways that felt meaningful to me. As the gathering wound down, Dad pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know that I'm grateful for everything you've done here," he said. "I'm also excited to see what you build with Phoenix Digital. And I hope you know that you'll always have a place to come back to if entrepreneurship doesn't work out the way you're planning." The offer was generous and well-intentioned, but it also revealed that he still didn't fully understand my motivation for leaving. This wasn't a risky experiment I might abandon if it got difficult. This was a fundamental choice about how I wanted to live and work. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. But I think you're going to be surprised by how well Phoenix Digital does. This isn't a backup plan for me. It's my primary plan." He smiled. "I'm counting on being surprised. And I'm proud of you for having the confidence to pursue it." That evening, I cleaned out my desk and packed up the personal items I'd accumulated over 3 years of working at Thompson Tech Solutions. The space felt strange and empty without my notebooks, reference materials, and the small decorations that had made it feel like mine. As I loaded the last box into my car, I looked back at the building that had housed so much of my professional life. Tomorrow, I'd wake up as the owner of Phoenix Digital Consulting. No more family business complications. No more feeling invisible in my own career. No more wondering whether my contributions were valued. The transition from Thompson Tech to Phoenix Digital wasn't just a job change. It was a complete reimagining of my professional identity. Instead of being Robert Thompson's daughter who happened to be good with computers, I was Alex Thompson, cybersecurity consultant and business owner. The difference in how people responded to that identity was immediate and striking. My first official day as Phoenix Digital's founder started with a client meeting at Emma Martinez's law firm. She'd asked me to present my security assessment findings to her partners, a group of senior attorneys who would make the final decision about implementing my recommendations. I arrived in a tailored navy suit that I'd bought specifically for this presentation, carrying a leather portfolio instead of my usual laptop bag. The conference room was intimidating, with its mahogany table and wall-to-wall law books, but I felt confident in my preparation and expertise. "Gentlemen, this is Alex Thompson from Phoenix Digital Consulting," Emma said, introducing me to 3 partners who looked skeptical about consulting with someone who appeared to be younger than their junior associates. "Ms. Thompson," said the senior partner, a distinguished man in his 60s, "Emma tells us you've identified some significant vulnerabilities in our network security. We'd like to understand the scope of these issues and your proposed solutions." For the next hour, I presented a comprehensive analysis of their security infrastructure, explaining complex technical concepts in language that legal professionals could understand and relate to. I used analogies to courtroom procedures and evidence protection to illustrate cybersecurity principles, making the abstract concepts concrete and relevant. Think of your current network setup like a courthouse with excellent security at the main entrance but unlocked side doors, I explained. Authorized users go through proper channels, but there are multiple ways for unauthorized access that bypass your primary protections. The partners asked detailed questions about implementation, costs, timeline, and potential disruption to their operations. Every question demonstrated that they were taking my recommendations seriously and viewing me as a trusted advisor rather than just a vendor. "Your approach is refreshingly practical," one partner commented. "We've spoken with other consultants who seemed more interested in selling us expensive solutions than solving our actual problems. My goal is to provide security that fits your real-world operations," I replied. "The best security system is one that people actually use correctly, not one that's theoretically perfect, but practically impossible to implement." By the end of the meeting, they'd approved the full implementation plan and asked me to begin work immediately. As I packed up my presentation materials, Emma walked me to the elevator. "That was exactly what they needed to hear," she said. "You spoke their language and addressed their concerns without talking down to them. It's rare to find technical expertise combined with that kind of communication skill." The elevator doors opened, and as I stepped inside, Emma handed me an envelope. A small bonus for excellent work and a letter of recommendation for future clients. "Word of mouth is everything in professional services, and I want to make sure people know what kind of consultant you are." Driving back to my apartment, I felt the satisfaction of work that mattered to people who understood its value. The contrast with family business dynamics was stark. At Thompson Tech, I'd often felt like I was convincing people to care about their own security. With Phoenix Digital's clients, I was solving problems they already understood were important. The afternoon brought a surprise call from Tom Wilson at the nonprofit. "Alex, I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I wanted to discuss expanding our project scope. The board was so impressed with your initial assessment that they've approved budget for a complete infrastructure overhaul." The project he described was significantly larger than our original consultation, involving network redesign, security implementation, and staff training across multiple locations. It was the kind of comprehensive engagement that could establish Phoenix Digital's reputation as a serious consulting firm rather than just an individual contractor. "The timeline is ambitious," Tom continued, "but we're willing to pay premium rates for priority attention. We've seen what happens when nonprofits try to save money on technology infrastructure, and we'd rather invest properly from the beginning." I accepted the project immediately, then spent the evening creating a detailed proposal and implementation plan. The work would require subcontracting some specialized services, which meant building relationships with other consultants and vendors. Phoenix Digital was about to become a real business with multiple moving parts. The next morning brought validation from an unexpected source. Sarah Chen called with news about a conversation she'd had at a professional networking event. "Alex, you're not going to believe this. I was at the Portland Tech Council mixer last night, and 3 different people asked me if I knew you. Apparently, word is spreading about Phoenix Digital." "What kind of word?" I asked, curious about what people were saying. "Good word. Emma Martinez's business partner was there, talking about how refreshing it was to work with a consultant who actually understood their industry. Tom Wilson mentioned your nonprofit project to someone from the United Way. And get this, Marcus Chen was there representing Thompson Tech, and he was telling people how much he learned from training with you. The networking effect was something I hadn't fully anticipated. In the insular world of Portland's technology community, reputation traveled fast. People talked to each other about which consultants delivered results and which ones just delivered bills. There's something else, Sarah continued. Rachel Kim from Cascade Ventures was asking about you. They're looking for a cybersecurity consultant to work with their portfolio companies. Small startups that need enterprise-level security but can't afford full-time staff. Cascade Ventures was exactly the kind of client I'd dreamed about when planning Phoenix Digital. Working with multiple startups would provide diverse project experience while building relationships with rapidly growing companies. If even one of their portfolio companies became a major success, Phoenix Digital would grow with them. Did she mention timeline? I asked, already mentally reviewing my capacity for additional projects. She wants to meet with you next week. I told her you were booking up quickly, so she's motivated to move fast. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment's small home office, looking at the business plan I'd created just 6 weeks earlier. Every projection I'd made was being exceeded, every timeline was accelerating, and every assumption about market demand was proving conservative. Phoenix Digital wasn't just succeeding, it was thriving in ways that felt almost surreal after years of having my expertise undervalued and underutilized. The meeting with Rachel Kim exceeded my expectations. Cascade Ventures occupied a sleek office space in the Pearl District, all glass walls and modern furniture that suggested serious money and sophisticated operations. Rachel herself was sharp, direct, and clearly accustomed to evaluating service providers quickly and decisively. "I'll be honest with you, Alex," she said after I'd presented Phoenix Digital's service offerings. "We've worked with several cybersecurity consultants, and most of them fall into 2 categories: technical experts who can't communicate with business people or business people who don't understand the technical details. You seem to be that rare consultant who can do both." She explained Cascade's needs in detail. Their portfolio included 12 companies in various stages of growth, from pre-revenue startups to established businesses preparing for acquisition. Each company had different security requirements, but all needed solutions that could scale efficiently as they grew. "We're not looking for someone to sell our company's expensive security packages," Rachel said. "We want someone who can assess their actual risk profiles and design protection that fits their operational realities and budget constraints." The consulting agreement we developed was unlike anything I'd imagined when starting Phoenix Digital. Instead of project-based work, I'd become Cascade Ventures' preferred cybersecurity consultant, with guaranteed minimum monthly hours and the potential for significant additional work as portfolio companies expanded. "This relationship could be transformative for Phoenix Digital," Rachel noted as we finalized the contract details. "If you deliver the kind of value I think you can, we'll be referring you to other venture capital firms and their portfolio companies." Walking out of that meeting, I felt like I'd crossed a threshold from small business owner to serious professional service provider. Phoenix Digital had credibility now, backed by clients whose recommendations would open doors throughout Portland's business community. The success was gratifying, but it also felt strange to receive so much professional recognition so quickly after years of feeling invisible in my own family's business. The contrast made me realize how much energy I'd been spending trying to prove my worth in situations where it would never be fully recognized or appreciated. That evening, I drove past Thompson Tech Solutions on my way home from a client meeting. The office lights were on, and I could see Marcus and Linda working late, probably dealing with some system issue or client emergency. For a moment, I felt a pang of something that might have been nostalgia or guilt. But then I thought about the day I'd just had. Client meetings where my expertise was valued and my recommendations were implemented immediately. Project planning. Sessions where my strategic input shaped business decisions. Contract negotiations where my time was priced according to its actual market value. I didn't miss the family business dynamics. I missed the comfort of familiar routines and predictable responsibilities. But comfort wasn't worth sacrificing professional growth and personal fulfillment. Phoenix Digital represented everything I'd wanted Thompson Tech Solutions to become but couldn't because of family expectations and entrenched roles. Working for myself meant working with clients who chose me specifically for my expertise, not clients who tolerated me because I happened to be available. The difference wasn't just professional, it was personal. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something that reflected my actual capabilities rather than other people's assumptions about my limitations. That night, I updated my business plan to reflect the new reality of Phoenix Digital's growth trajectory. The conservative projections I'd made 6 weeks earlier were already obsolete. At this rate, I'd need to consider hiring additional consultants within 6 months. The thought of becoming an employer rather than just a business owner was both exciting and intimidating. But if Phoenix Digital's early success had taught me anything, it was that I was capable of much more than I'd ever been allowed to demonstrate. The invisible daughter was building something that couldn't be ignored. And that felt like the sweetest possible revenge against every dinner table dismissal and casual comment about my insignificance. Not revenge, actually, justice. The kind of justice that comes from proving your worth to yourself, regardless of who else notices or approves. 6 months after launching Phoenix Digital, I moved into a proper office space in a converted warehouse building downtown. The space had exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and windows that looked out over the Willamette River. More importantly, it had room for growth. The lease allowed for expansion into adjacent units, and I was already thinking about what kind of team I wanted to build. The morning I received the keys, I stood in the empty space and tried to absorb the magnitude of what I'd accomplished. 6 months ago, I'd been working from my apartment's spare bedroom, hoping to land enough clients to cover basic expenses. Now I had a waiting list of potential projects, contracts with 2 venture capital firms, and a reputation that was opening. Doors I'd never imagined. Sarah Chen was my first official hire, leaving her project manager position to become Phoenix Digital's director of operations. She brought organizational skills that complemented my technical expertise, along with a network of contacts from her years in Portland's tech community. "I can't believe I'm finally working for myself," Sarah said as we arranged furniture in the new office. "Well, technically working for you, but it feels like working for myself since I helped design my own job description." That collaboration in defining roles was intentional. I'd learned from watching Dad struggle with traditional hierarchical management that the best way to retain talented people was to give them ownership over their work and growth opportunities that matched their ambitions. Our first major project as a team came from an unexpected source. Jessica called me on a Wednesday afternoon, her voice carrying an unusual mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Alex, I have a weird favor to ask. My company landed this huge client, a regional restaurant chain that wants to completely modernize their technology infrastructure. They need cybersecurity consulting, and our usual contractor is booked for months. Would Phoenix Digital be interested in bidding on the project?" The request was loaded with irony. After years of feeling dismissed by my family, Jessica was now actively seeking my professional services. But beyond the personal dynamics, it represented exactly the kind of growth opportunity Phoenix Digital needed. "Send me the project specifications," I said. "If it's a good fit for our capabilities, we'd definitely be interested." The restaurant chain, Cascade Kitchen, operated 15 locations across Oregon and Washington. They were implementing new point-of-sale systems, customer loyalty programs, and integrated inventory management across all locations. The security requirements were complex because of payment processing regulations and the need to protect customer data across multiple sites. Sarah and I spent a week developing a comprehensive proposal that addressed not just immediate security needs, but long-term scalability as the chain continued expanding. We included training programs for staff, ongoing monitoring services, and quarterly security assessments to ensure continued compliance with industry standards. "This proposal is incredibly thorough," Jessica told me after reviewing our submission. "But I have to warn you, the selection committee includes some people who might be skeptical about hiring such a new consulting firm." "What kind of skepticism?" I asked. "The usual concerns about whether a small consultancy can handle enterprise-level projects. They're comparing you to established firms with decades of experience and hundreds of employees." It was the classic challenge facing any growing business. Clients wanted proven track records, but you couldn't build a track record without clients willing to take chances on your potential. Fortunately, Phoenix Digital's work with Cascade Ventures had given us exactly the kind of reference that addressed those concerns. The presentation to Cascade Kitchen's selection committee was held in their corporate headquarters, a modern building in Teagard that housed their administrative offices and test kitchen. The committee included the CEO, IT director, operations manager, and 2 outside consultants they'd brought in to evaluate proposals. I arrived with Sarah and a portfolio of case studies from our previous projects, anonymized to protect client confidentiality, but detailed enough to demonstrate our capabilities and approach. The presentation room was set up like a boardroom, with a long table and multimedia equipment for formal presentations. "Good morning, everyone," I began, connecting my laptop to their projection system. "I'm Alex Thompson, founder of Phoenix Digital Consulting, and this is Sarah Chen, our Director of Operations. We're here to discuss how Phoenix Digital can help Cascade Kitchen achieve their technology modernization goals while maintaining the highest levels of security and compliance." For the next hour, Sarah and I presented a detailed analysis of Cascade Kitchen's security requirements, potential vulnerabilities in their planned system architecture, and our proposed solutions. We addressed concerns about scalability, regulatory, compliance, and ongoing support in language that was technical enough to demonstrate expertise, but accessible enough for non-technical decision-makers. The CEO, a woman in her 50s who'd built Cascade Kitchen from a single location into a regional success story, asked pointed questions about our experience with multi-location implementations and payment processing security. "We've worked with several clients who operate across multiple sites," I explained, pulling up a case study from Tom Wilson's nonprofit, which had locations in 3 cities. "The key is designing centralized security policies that can be implemented consistently while allowing for local operational flexibility." "What about your team size?" asked the IT director. "The other firms we're considering have dedicated specialists for different aspects of the project. How do we know Phoenix Digital has sufficient resources?" Sarah fielded this question smoothly. "Phoenix Digital operates as a network of specialized consultants rather than a traditional consulting firm. For this project, we'd bring in additional experts for payment processing, compliance, and regulatory requirements while maintaining overall project management and security architecture in-house. This approach gives you access to the same level of expertise as larger firms while providing more personalized attention and faster decision-making." The presentation concluded with a detailed implementation timeline and budget breakdown. Our costs were competitive with the larger firms but structured differently, emphasizing value-based pricing rather than hourly billing for routine tasks. "We'll be making our decision by the end of the week," the CEO said as we packed up our materials. "We appreciate the thoroughness of your proposal and the clarity of your presentation." Walking back to our car, Sarah and I conducted a quick debrief on how the presentation had gone. We felt confident about our technical approach and pricing, but there was always uncertainty about how potential clients weighed factors like company size and established reputation against innovation and personalized service. The call came on Friday afternoon. Jessica's voice was excited when she delivered the news. "Alex, you got it. Cascade Kitchen selected Phoenix Digital for the project. The CEO was really impressed with your presentation, especially the way you addressed scalability concerns and regulatory compliance. The contract was worth more than Phoenix Digital had generated in our first 4 months combined. More importantly, it represented validation that we could compete successfully against established firms for major projects." "There's something else," Jessica continued. "The CEO mentioned that she'd like to refer Phoenix Digital to other restaurant industry contacts. Apparently, there's a lot of demand for consultants who understand both technology and food service operations." The Cascade Kitchen project became Phoenix Digital's showcase engagement. Over 6 months, we implemented security systems across all 15 locations, trained staff on data protection protocols, and established monitoring procedures that exceeded industry standards. The client was so satisfied that they hired us to conduct security assessments for 2 restaurant chains they were considering acquiring. But the project's success created new challenges. Phoenix Digital needed more consultants to handle growing demand, but I was reluctant to expand too quickly and risk compromising service quality. The solution came from an unexpected conversation with Emma Martinez. "Alex, I've been thinking about Phoenix Digital's growth trajectory," Emma said during a quarterly security review at her law firm. "You're at the point where you need to decide whether you want to stay a boutique consultancy or build something larger." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, you're turning down projects because you don't have capacity, which suggests demand is outstripping your ability to serve it. That's a good problem to have, but it's still a problem." Emma's observation was accurate. In the past month, I'd referred 3 potential clients to other consultants because Phoenix Digital was fully booked. While maintaining quality standards was important, turning away business also meant limiting growth opportunities. "Have you considered a partnership model?" Emma continued. "Instead of hiring employees, you could affiliate with other independent consultants and share larger projects. It would give you access to specialized expertise without the overhead of permanent staff." The idea was intriguing. Portland had several experienced cybersecurity consultants who worked independently, but often struggled to land major contracts because clients preferred working with established firms. A network model could benefit everyone involved. I spent the following week reaching out to consultants whose work I respected, proposing a collaboration framework that would allow Phoenix Digital to take on larger projects while giving independent specialists access to corporate clients they couldn't reach on their own. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Within a month, Phoenix Digital had formalized partnerships with specialists in network architecture, compliance auditing, and incident response. We maintained centralized project management and client relationships while distributing technical work among team members with appropriate expertise. The model proved successful immediately. Our next major project was a comprehensive security overhaul for a manufacturing company that required expertise in industrial control systems, something none of our core team had specialized experience with. Through our network, we brought in a consultant who'd spent years working with manufacturing clients, delivering solutions we couldn't have provided independently. "This partnership approach is brilliant," Sarah told me as we reviewed quarterly financial reports. "We're growing revenue without proportionally increasing overhead, and our clients are getting better results because they have access to exactly the right expertise for their specific needs." The success was gratifying, but it also felt surreal. A year ago, I'd been struggling to get recognition for routine maintenance work at Thompson Tech Solutions. Now I was running a consulting firm that other professionals wanted to affiliate with, serving clients who competed for our attention. The contrast became even more apparent during a chance encounter at a downtown coffee shop. I was meeting with a potential client when I noticed Dad sitting at a corner table with someone I didn't recognize. He spotted me as I was leaving and came over to say hello. "Alex, good to see you. How's the consulting business going?" "Really well," I said. "We just finished a major project for a restaurant chain, and we're expanding our team to handle growing demand." Dad smiled, but I could see something that looked like wistfulness in his expression. "That's wonderful. I'm proud of what you've built." "How are things at Thompson Tech?" I asked. "Steady. Marcus and Linda are doing good work, though we haven't landed any major new contracts lately. The market seems to be shifting toward more specialized services, and we're still figuring out how to adapt." It was a polite way of saying that Thompson Tech Solutions was struggling to compete in an increasingly sophisticated market. The basic IT support model that had sustained the business for years was being displaced by specialized consultants and managed service providers who could offer more comprehensive solutions. "You might consider partnering with specialists for complex projects," I suggested. "There's a lot of demand for local consultants who can handle routine support while bringing in experts for specialized work." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "That's not a bad idea. We've been trying to do everything in-house, but maybe that's not realistic anymore." It was strange to be giving business advice to my former employer, but also satisfying in a way that wasn't petty or vindictive. I genuinely wanted Dad's business to succeed, and I was in a position to offer useful guidance based on Phoenix Digital's experience. A few weeks later, Dad called to ask if Phoenix Digital would be interested in subcontracting on a cybersecurity assessment for one of Thompson Tech's clients. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, but the collaboration worked well for everyone involved. Thompson Tech maintained their client relationship while Phoenix Digital provided expertise they couldn't deliver independently. "This feels like how things should have worked when you were here," Dad said after we completed the project. "Combining your specialized knowledge with our local relationships and ongoing support." "Maybe," I said, "but I needed to build my own reputation first. Now we can collaborate as equals rather than as family members with complicated dynamics." The comment seemed to resonate with him. "I think I understand that now. You needed to prove to yourself that you could succeed independently." "Exactly. And now that I have, we can work together when it makes sense without the family business." Complications. As Phoenix Digital's reputation grew, I started receiving invitations to speak at industry conferences and professional networking events. The first major speaking engagement was at the Pacific Northwest Cybersecurity Summit, a regional conference that attracted hundreds of technology professionals and business leaders. My presentation topic was Scaling Security Solutions for Growing Businesses, based on Phoenix Digital's experience working with companies at different stages of development. The audience included IT directors, consultants, and business owners who were dealing with the challenge of implementing appropriate security measures without overinvesting in unnecessary protections. "The key to effective cybersecurity consulting," I told the audience, "is understanding that security requirements scale with business operations, not just with business size. A 10-person startup that handles sensitive customer data may need more sophisticated protections than a 100-person manufacturing company that primarily manages internal operations." The presentation was well received, generating follow-up conversations with several potential clients and 2 offers to present at other conferences. More importantly, it established Phoenix Digital's thought leadership in the cybersecurity community and demonstrated our expertise to a broader professional audience. After the conference, I was approached by a journalist from Portland Business Journal who was writing an article about emerging technology consultancies in the region. The interview covered Phoenix Digital's growth story, our network-based approach to consulting, and predictions about trends in cybersecurity services. "What advice would you give to other professionals who are considering leaving established companies to start their own consultancies?" the journalist asked. "Make sure you're starting a business for the right reasons," I said. "If you're just frustrated with your current employer, changing jobs might solve your problems more easily than starting a company. But if you have a vision for providing services that aren't currently available, or serving clients in ways that established firms can't or won't, then entrepreneurship might be the right path." The article was published 2 weeks later with the headline, "From Family Business to Cybersecurity Success: How Alex Thompson Built Phoenix Digital." The piece highlighted Phoenix Digital's rapid growth and innovative approach to consultant networking, positioning the company as an example of how technology professionals could build successful practices by focusing on client needs rather than traditional service delivery models. The publicity generated immediate business results. Within a week of the article's publication, Phoenix Digital received inquiries from 6 potential clients and 2 more consultants who wanted to join our network. More significantly, we were invited to bid on a major project for the Port of Portland, a government contract that would require security clearances and regulatory compliance expertise we'd never pursued before. "This is exactly the kind of opportunity that can transform a business," Sarah said as we reviewed the port's request for proposals. "Government contracts provide credibility and steady revenue, but they also require capabilities we don't currently have." The port project would require expanding Phoenix Digital's services into areas like physical security integration and regulatory compliance that went beyond our current cybersecurity focus. It would also mean bringing in consultants with government contracting experience and security clearances. Are we ready to take on this level of complexity? I asked Sarah during one of our planning sessions. I think the question is whether we're ready to stay where we are, she replied. Phoenix Digital has reached the point where we either need to grow into new capabilities or accept that we'll remain a regional cybersecurity consultancy serving mid-market clients. The observation was astute. Phoenix Digital had succeeded beyond my initial projections, but continued growth would require strategic decisions about what kind of company we wanted to become. The port contract represented a path toward becoming a comprehensive security consultancy rather than just a cybersecurity specialist. After extensive discussion and financial analysis, we decided to pursue the port project while simultaneously developing capabilities that would serve similar clients. We brought in a former government contractor who understood the regulatory requirements and bidding processes, and we began the lengthy process of obtaining security clearances for key team members. The proposal process took 3 months and required demonstrating capabilities we were still developing, but the exercise forced Phoenix Digital to mature as an organization. We created formal procedures for project management, quality assurance, and client communication that would serve us well regardless of whether we won the port contract. The notification came on a Friday afternoon in November, almost exactly 1 year after I'd submitted my resignation from Thompson Tech Solutions. Sarah and I were working late, reviewing quarterly reports and planning for the following year, when the email arrived from the port's procurement office. Phoenix Digital Consulting has been selected as the preferred vendor for cybersecurity assessment and implementation services, the message read. Please contact our office to schedule a kickoff meeting and finalize contract details. Sarah, and I stared at the email in silence for a moment, then simultaneously broke into celebration. The port contract was worth more than Phoenix Digital's entire first-year revenue, and it came with options for additional work that could sustain the company for years. I can't believe we actually got it, Sarah said, still staring at the computer screen. I can, I replied, thinking about the journey from invisible family employee to government contractor in just 12 months. We earned it. That evening, I drove through downtown Portland, past the office buildings where many of our clients worked, past Thompson Tech Solutions with its modest storefront, past the restaurant where I'd eaten lunch alone during so many difficult days when I was planning my departure from the family business. The city looked different now, not because anything had changed physically, but because my relationship to it had transformed. Portland was no longer just the place where I lived and worked. It was the market where Phoenix Digital had established credibility, the community where I'd built professional relationships, the ecosystem where I'd proven that taking risks on your own capabilities could generate extraordinary results. At home that night, I updated my business plan one more time, projecting growth scenarios that would have seemed fantasy a year earlier. Phoenix Digital would need to double its team size to handle the port contract while maintaining existing client relationships. We'd need larger office space, more sophisticated project management systems, and deeper expertise in areas we were just beginning to explore. But the most significant change wasn't operational or financial. It was personal. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something that reflected my actual potential rather than other people's assumptions about my limitations. The invisible daughter had created something that couldn't be ignored, not because I was trying to prove anything to my family, but because I'd finally proven something to myself. The phone rang as I was reviewing financial projections. It was Mom. Alex, I just saw the article about Phoenix Digital in the Business Journal. I had no idea your company had grown so much. It's been a busy year, I said, wondering what had prompted her to call. I wanted to apologize again for what I said at dinner last year, about no one noticing if you disappeared. I was wrong, and I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were building." The apology was generous, but it also felt unnecessary. Mom's hurtful comment had been the catalyst for changes that led to outcomes I could never have achieved while seeking approval from people who didn't understand my capabilities. "You don't need to apologize, Mom." That conversation helped me realize some things I needed to understand about myself. Like what? Like the fact that I was trying to be visible in the wrong place. I was working so hard to get recognition from people who couldn't see what I was offering that I forgot to offer it to people who would actually value it. Mom was quiet for a moment. "You sound different, Alex. More confident." "I feel different. It turns out that running your own business and serving clients who appreciate your work can be pretty empowering." "I'm proud of you," she said, and, for the first time, I believed she actually understood what she was proud of. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment's living room, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the strange, circuitous route that had led from family disappointment to professional success. The journey hadn't been linear or predictable, but it had been worth every uncomfortable conversation and uncertain moment. Tomorrow, I'd start planning Phoenix Digital's next phase of growth. But tonight, I was content to sit in the quiet satisfaction of having built something meaningful from scratch, something that belonged entirely to me and reflected exactly what I was capable of achieving when working with people who understood the value of what I had to offer. 2 years after launching Phoenix Digital, I found myself standing in front of 300 business leaders at the Oregon Technology Awards ceremony, holding a crystal trophy that read, "Emerging Business Leader of the Year." The weight of the award in my hands felt surreal, not because I didn't think I deserved it, but because I could still remember sitting at family dinners where my professional accomplishments were dismissed as playing with computers. The acceptance speech I'd prepared focused on Phoenix Digital's growth and the importance of investing in cybersecurity infrastructure. But standing at the podium, looking out at an audience that included venture capitalists, Fortune 500 executives, and technology innovators from across the Pacific Northwest, I found myself thinking about a different message entirely. When I started Phoenix Digital 3 years ago, I began, deviating from my prepared remarks. I thought success would mean proving that I was valuable to people who had overlooked my contributions. What I discovered instead was that the most important validation comes from serving clients who already understand the value of what you're offering. The audience was attentive, but I could sense some confusion about where I was heading with this personal reflection at a business awards ceremony. The lesson I want to share tonight isn't about cybersecurity or consulting or building technology companies. It's about the courage to stop trying to convince people who can't see your worth and start focusing that energy on people who can. Sometimes the best business decision you can make is walking away from clients, employers, or even family situations that consistently undervalue your contributions. The applause that followed was more thoughtful than enthusiastic, but several people approached me afterward to say that my comments had resonated with their own professional experiences. One woman, a senior engineer at Nike, told me that my speech had given her the courage to finally leave a toxic work environment she'd been tolerating for years. "I kept thinking things would get better if I just worked harder and proved myself more thoroughly," she said. "But your story made me realize that some situations aren't fixable through individual effort. Sometimes you have to change the situation entirely." The conversation stayed with me during the drive home to my new house in the hills west of Portland. The property sat on 2 acres of Douglas fir and maple trees, with a view of the city lights below and Mount Hood in the distance. It was the kind of home I'd dreamed about during those late nights at Thompson Tech Solutions, when I'd wondered if I'd ever have the financial freedom to live anywhere other than a cramped apartment. The house also served as Phoenix Digital's corporate retreat center, with a conference room where we held quarterly planning sessions and client strategy meetings. The combination of professional and personal space reflected how integrated my work and life had become, but in a healthy way that felt sustainable rather than consuming. Phoenix Digital now employed 12 full-time consultants and maintained partnerships with another 20 specialists who worked on project-specific contracts. Our client base included 3 Fortune 500 companies, 2 government agencies, and over 40 regional businesses across a dozen industries. We'd opened a satellite office in Seattle and were considering expansion into the San Francisco Bay Area. But the growth metrics that impressed industry observers weren't what made me proudest of what we'd built. The company culture we'd created was what truly felt like an achievement. Phoenix Digital operated on principles I'd learned from my own experience of feeling undervalued and invisible. Every consultant had equity participation in company profits. Every project included professional development opportunities for team members. Every client relationship was managed with the same level of attention, regardless of contract size. We're not just building a consulting firm, I'd told our team during our most recent planning retreat. We're demonstrating that technology companies can operate with values that prioritize people over profits while still achieving exceptional financial results. The statement wasn't just idealistic rhetoric. Phoenix Digital's employee retention rate was over 90%. Our client satisfaction scores consistently exceeded industry benchmarks, and our profit margins were higher than most consulting firms twice our size. Treating people well turned out to be excellent business strategy. The validation of our approach came from unexpected sources. Harvard Business School contacted us about developing a case study on Phoenix Digital's network-based consulting model. The Oregon Small Business Development Center asked me to mentor other women entrepreneurs who were launching technology companies. 3 venture capital firms had approached us about investment opportunities, though we'd declined all offers because we preferred maintaining independence. The most meaningful recognition came from within Portland's technology community itself. Phoenix Digital had become the preferred cybersecurity consultant for the city's emerging startup ecosystem, not because we were the largest or most established firm, but because entrepreneurs trusted our commitment to understanding their unique challenges and designing scalable solutions. Working with Phoenix Digital feels like having a technology advisor rather than just a vendor, said Marcus Webb, founder of a fintech startup that had grown from 5 employees to 50 during the 2 years we'd been providing their security consulting. Alex and her team understand that our security needs have to evolve with our business model, and they're always thinking 3 steps ahead about what we'll need as we scale. That kind of client relationship was exactly what I'd envisioned when planning Phoenix Digital's service philosophy. Instead of selling predetermined packages, we developed customized solutions that aligned with each client's operational realities and growth objectives. Instead of creating dependencies on our ongoing services, we trained client teams to manage routine security tasks independently while maintaining our relationship for strategic planning and complex projects. The approach required more initial investment in understanding each client's business, but it generated deeper relationships and more predictable long-term revenue. Clients who felt genuinely served rather than merely sold to became advocates who referred other potential clients and expanded their own engagements with Phoenix Digital over time. The success brought opportunities I'd never anticipated. The Department of Homeland Security invited me to participate in a cybersecurity advisory committee focused on protecting small and medium-sized businesses from nation-state attacks. The Oregon legislature asked me to testify about cybersecurity legislation that would affect local businesses. The Portland Business Journal named me to their 40 Under 40 list of emerging leaders. Each recognition felt gratifying, but also slightly surreal when contrasted with memories of feeling invisible at family gatherings. The professional identity I'd built around Phoenix Digital was so different from how I'd been perceived during my years at Thompson Tech Solutions that sometimes it felt like I was living someone else's life. The contrast became particularly apparent during a chance encounter at the Portland International Airport. I was returning from a consulting engagement in Denver when I spotted Jessica at the gate for a flight to Los Angeles. She was dressed in expensive business attire and typing intensively on her laptop, the image of a successful marketing professional. "Alex, what are you doing here?" she asked, looking up from her computer as I approached. Client meeting in Denver, I said, settling into the seat next to her. How about you? Conference in LA about influencer marketing strategies. The agency is sending 3 of us to learn about the latest trends in social media engagement. We caught up on personal news while waiting for our respective flights. Jessica's career was progressing well, and she'd recently been promoted to senior account manager with responsibility for several major clients. Her enthusiasm about her work was genuine and infectious. You know what's funny? Jessica said as they called boarding for her flight. When you left Thompson Tech to start Phoenix Digital, I thought you were making a huge mistake. The business seemed so much safer than trying to build something from scratch. What made you change your mind? I asked, watching what you've accomplished. Not just the financial success, but the way you've built something that's entirely yours. I love my job, but I'm still essentially executing other people's strategies. You're creating the strategy. The observation was perceptive and generous. Jessica had always been supportive of my decisions, but this was the first time she'd explicitly acknowledged that my career path might actually be more ambitious than her own. There are advantages to both approaches, I said diplomatically. Building a company from scratch is rewarding, but it's also risky and demanding in ways that traditional employment isn't. Maybe, Jessica replied, but you seem happier now than you ever did when you were working for Dad. More confident, more yourself. She was right, though I hadn't fully articulated the change to myself until she mentioned it. The person I'd become as Phoenix Digital's founder was more aligned with my actual personality and capabilities than the role I'd played as the dutiful family employee. The difference wasn't just professional. It was fundamental to how I saw myself and interacted with the world. After Jessica's flight departed, I had an hour before my own boarding time. I used the wait to call Tom Wilson, whose nonprofit had become one of Phoenix Digital's longest-standing clients. Tom had become something of a mentor and sounding board for strategic decisions about the company's direction. Alex, perfect timing, Tom said when he answered. I was just reviewing the security assessment you completed last month. The board is incredibly impressed with the improvements you've implemented. We've gone from being a cybersecurity liability to having better protections than organizations 10 times our size. That was always the goal, I said. Effective security doesn't have to be proportional to budget size if you focus on addressing actual risks rather than implementing generic solutions. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. The foundation that provides our largest grant has asked me to recommend a cybersecurity consultant for their other grantees. About 30 organizations total, mostly nonprofits like ours with limited technology budgets, but significant data protection responsibilities. The opportunity Tom was describing would provide Phoenix Digital with a steady revenue stream while serving organizations that aligned with my personal values. Nonprofit clients often couldn't afford premium consulting rates, but they were typically committed to implementing recommendations thoroughly and maintaining long-term relationships with service providers who understood their mission-driven culture. What kind of timeline are they considering? I asked. They want to start with pilot programs at 5 organizations and expand based on results. The foundation would subsidize consulting costs for the first year, then transition to a fee-for-service model for organizations that want to continue the relationship. It was exactly the kind of socially conscious business development that differentiated Phoenix Digital from profit-maximizing consulting firms. We'd built our reputation by serving clients who valued our expertise, but we'd maintained our values by ensuring that effective cybersecurity consulting was accessible to organizations regardless of their ability to pay premium rates. Send me the details, I said. This sounds like something we'd be very interested in pursuing. The flight back to Portland gave me time to reflect on how much my professional priorities had evolved since starting Phoenix Digital. Early in the company's development, I'd been focused primarily on proving that I could compete successfully against established consulting firms. Now, I was more interested in using Phoenix Digital's success to address problems that aligned with my personal values and long-term vision for the company. The shift wasn't just about having the luxury of choosing clients selectively. It reflected a fundamental change in how I thought about business success. Revenue growth and market recognition were important, but they weren't the ultimate measures of whether Phoenix Digital was achieving its purpose. That purpose had clarified over time. Phoenix Digital existed to demonstrate that cybersecurity consulting could be both technically excellent and ethically grounded, that successful businesses could prioritize employee well-being and client service over short-term profit maximization, and that technology expertise could be applied to solving problems that mattered rather than just generating billable hours. Landing at PDX, I took the Max light rail into downtown Portland rather than calling a rideshare service. The train route passed through neighborhoods I'd lived in during my early career, including the apartment complex where I'd planned Phoenix Digital's launch. Looking out the window at familiar landmarks, I tried to process the magnitude of change that had occurred in such a relatively short period. 3 years ago, I'd been the invisible family employee whose contributions were taken for granted and whose professional ambitions were dismissed. Now I was running a consulting firm that competed successfully for major contracts, employed people whose careers I was actively developing, and served clients who specifically sought out our expertise. The transformation hadn't required becoming a different person. It had required finding contexts where my existing capabilities could be recognized and utilized effectively. The skills I'd developed at Thompson Tech Solutions were the same skills. That made Phoenix Digital successful. The difference was working with people who understood the value of what I was offering. That evening, I drove out to Thompson Tech Solutions for a dinner meeting with Dad and his new business partner. After struggling to compete with specialized consulting firms, Dad had decided to merge Thompson Tech with a larger IT services company that could provide the resources and expertise needed to serve complex client requirements. The merger was a smart strategic decision that would allow Dad to focus on the client relationship management he'd always enjoyed, while partnering with people who had deeper technical capabilities and broader service offerings. It was also a tacit acknowledgement that the small family business model I'd helped maintain for 3 years was no longer viable in an increasingly sophisticated marketplace. I want you to know that I don't regret anything about how things worked. Out, Dad said as we reviewed the merger documents over dinner at a quiet restaurant near his office. You leaving Thompson Tech forced me to confront some realities about the business that I'd been avoiding. This partnership is going to be much better for everyone involved than trying to continue operating the way we were. I'm glad it's working. Out well, I said, and I genuinely meant it. You've always been better at building relationships than managing technical operations. This structure lets you focus on what you do best. Dad smiled. It's ironic, isn't it? You had to leave the family business for both of us to end up in situations that actually suit our strengths. The comment was more insightful than I'd expected. Dad was right that my departure had forced both of us to pursue paths that were more aligned with our individual capabilities and interests. The family business had constrained both of our potential by trying to force us into roles that weren't optimal fits. Maybe that's the real lesson, I said. Sometimes people need to separate professionally in order to maintain good relationships personally. I think you're right about that. Working together again on those subcontracting projects has been enjoyable in a way that day-to-day family business never was. We can appreciate each other's expertise without getting caught up in family dynamics. The observation crystallized something I'd been thinking about but hadn't articulated clearly. The most successful collaborations were based on mutual respect for each other's capabilities rather than obligation or tradition. Phoenix Digital's network model worked because every partnership was voluntary and beneficial to all parties involved. After dinner, Dad walked me to my car and shook my hand, formally, the way he might with any business partner. I'm proud of what you've built, Alex. Not just Phoenix Digital, but the way you've handled the transition from family employee to independent business owner. You've been classy about everything, even when you had reason to be resentful." "There was never any reason for resentment," I said. "You gave me the opportunity to develop skills and experience that made Phoenix Digital possible. Even if the family business wasn't the right long-term situation for me, it was valuable preparation for what came next." Driving home through the quiet residential streets of Portland, I thought about the complexity of family relationships and professional development. The years at Thompson Tech Solutions had often felt frustrating and limiting, but they'd also provided essential training for running my own consulting practice. The skills I'd learned handling difficult clients, managing multiple projects simultaneously, and explaining technical concepts to non-technical audiences were directly applicable to Phoenix Digital's operations. The experience had also taught me what kind of work environment I needed to thrive. Understanding my own requirements for professional recognition, creative autonomy, and values alignment had been crucial for designing Phoenix Digital's culture and service philosophy. Most importantly, those years of feeling undervalued had motivated me to ensure that Phoenix Digital operated differently. Every policy and procedure we'd implemented was influenced by my commitment to creating the kind of workplace I'd wished for during my time as an invisible family employee. The following week brought an unexpected opportunity that would test those values. A Fortune 500 technology company approached Phoenix Digital about a potential acquisition. They were interested in purchasing our client base, our consulting methodologies, and our team as part of their expansion into cybersecurity services. The financial offer was substantial, enough to provide every Phoenix Digital employee with significant equity payouts and guarantee employment with the acquiring company for at least 3 years. It was the kind of exit opportunity that many entrepreneurs dream about and few actually receive. But the acquisition would also mean the end of Phoenix Digital as an independent company. Our consulting methodologies would be integrated into their standardized service delivery model. Our client relationships would be managed according to their corporate policies. Our team members would become employees of a large corporation rather than equity participants in a company they'd helped build. "This is a life-changing opportunity," Sarah said as we reviewed the acquisition proposal in Phoenix Digital's conference room. "The payout would set everyone up financially, and working for a Fortune 500 company would provide career opportunities that we can't offer as an independent consultancy." She was right about the financial benefits, and I could see the appeal for team members who were interested in corporate career advancement. But I also knew that accepting the acquisition would mean abandoning the values and culture that had made Phoenix Digital successful in the first place. "What do you think would happen to our consulting approach if we became part of their organization?" I asked the assembled team. Marcus Chen, our lead technical consultant, spoke up first. "Honestly, I think we'd lose most of what makes our work satisfying. Large corporations have standardized procedures for everything. We wouldn't be able to customize solutions the way we do now." Linda Rodriguez, who'd joined us from a major consulting firm specifically because she was tired of corporate constraints, agreed. "I've worked in that environment before. Individual consultants have very little autonomy, and client relationships are managed by account executives rather than technical staff. It's efficient, but it's not fulfilling." The discussion continued for 2 hours, with team members expressing a mixture of excitement about the financial opportunity and concern about losing the professional autonomy they'd come to value at Phoenix Digital. Everyone understood that turning down a substantial acquisition offer was a significant decision that would affect their personal financial planning. "I want everyone to think about this carefully," I said as we concluded the meeting. "This isn't just my decision to make. Phoenix Digital belongs to all of us, and everyone's input matters." Over the following week, I had individual conversations with every team member about their preferences regarding the acquisition. The discussions were thoughtful and honest, focusing on long-term career goals rather than just immediate financial benefits. The consensus that emerged was surprising but clear. Despite the substantial financial offer, the majority of our team preferred to remain independent. They valued the professional autonomy, creative challenges, and values alignment that Phoenix Digital provided more than the security and advancement opportunities that corporate employment would offer. "I could make more money at a large consulting firm," said Elena Vasquez, our newest hire who joined us directly from graduate school. "But I learn more here in 6 months than I would in 2 years at a corporate job. The opportunity to work directly with clients and shape our service delivery is worth more to me than a larger salary." The decision to decline the acquisition offer wasn't difficult once I understood how our team felt about it. Phoenix Digital had succeeded because we'd prioritized values and relationships over short-term financial optimization. Selling to a corporation that operated according to different principles would have been inconsistent with everything we'd built. I called the acquiring company's representative on a Friday afternoon to formally decline their offer. "I have to say, this is unusual," the executive said after I explained our decision. "Most consulting firms would consider this kind of offer seriously, even if they ultimately decided against it." "We did consider it seriously," I replied. "But Phoenix Digital's value comes from things that aren't transferable to a corporate environment. Our consulting methodologies work because our team has the autonomy to customize solutions for each client. Our client relationships are strong because they're built on personal trust rather than corporate branding." "What if we restructured the offer to provide more operational autonomy?" he asked. "We could treat Phoenix Digital as a subsidiary, rather than integrating it completely into our services division." The question suggested that he understood why we might be reluctant to give up our independence. But I wasn't convinced that any corporate structure would preserve the culture and values that made Phoenix Digital successful. "I appreciate the willingness to consider alternative structures," I said. "But I think we're better positioned to serve our clients and develop our team as an independent company. If that changes in the future, I hope you'll consider us again." After hanging up, I sat in my office looking out at the Portland skyline and reflecting on the magnitude of the decision we just made. Turning down a substantial acquisition offer to maintain our independence was either the smartest strategic decision in Phoenix Digital's history or a missed opportunity we'd regret for years. But as I thought about the team members who'd chosen autonomy over security and the clients who trusted us precisely because we weren't constrained by corporate policies, I felt confident that we'd made the right choice. Phoenix Digital existed to demonstrate that business success didn't require sacrificing values or relationships. Accepting an acquisition that would have compromised those principles would have undermined everything we'd worked to build. That evening, I hosted a team dinner at my house to celebrate our decision to remain independent. As we sat around the fire pit on my deck, looking out at the city lights below, the conversation turned to Phoenix Digital's future goals and growth opportunities. "What do you want Phoenix Digital to look like in 5 years?" Sarah asked. "I want us to be the consulting firm that other consultants aspire to work for," I said. "Not because of our size or revenue, but because of how we treat our people and serve our clients. I want to prove that you can build a successful technology company without sacrificing ethics or relationships." The conversation continued late, into the evening, with team members sharing their own visions for Phoenix Digital's evolution. The common themes were growth that preserved our culture, expansion that maintained our service quality, and success that was measured by impact rather than just financial metrics. Driving home that night, I thought about the journey from invisible family employee to independent business owner who'd just turned down a Fortune 500 acquisition offer. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been predictable or linear. But every step of the process had reinforced the same fundamental lesson. The most important validation comes from people who already understand the value of what you're offering. Trying to convince people who can't see your worth is exhausting and ultimately futile. Finding people who appreciate your capabilities and creating value for them is energizing and sustainable. Phoenix Digital's success wasn't just about cybersecurity. Consulting or business development. It was about the courage to stop seeking approval from people who couldn't provide it and start building relationships with people who could. It was about valuing yourself enough to walk away from situations that didn't serve you, even when those situations were comfortable and familiar. Most importantly, it was about understanding that being invisible in one context doesn't mean you're invisible everywhere. Sometimes you just need to find the right stage for your particular talents to be seen and appreciated. 3 years after Mom's dinner table comment about my theoretical disappearance, I'd built something that couldn't be ignored. Not because I was trying to prove anything to my family, but because I'd finally stopped trying to prove anything to people who weren't equipped to understand what I was offering. The best revenge, it turned out, wasn't revenge at all. It was success on your own terms, built according to your own values, serving people who genuinely appreciated what you brought to their lives. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that you'd created something meaningful from scratch, something that belonged entirely to you and reflected exactly what you were capable of achieving when working with people who understood your worth. Looking back, Mom's cruel comment had been a gift, though she'd never intended it that way. It had forced me to confront the reality that I'd already disappeared from my own life, that I'd been so focused on being useful to other people that I'd forgotten to be valuable to myself. The journey from that realization to Phoenix Digital's current success had been challenging, but ultimately liberating. I'd learned to trust my own judgment, value my own capabilities, and build relationships with people who saw me clearly rather than through the lens of their own expectations or limitations. That night, I fell asleep in my own house, surrounded by evidence of what I'd built independently, knowing that I'd wake up the next morning as the owner of a company that reflected my values and served clients who appreciated my expertise. The invisible daughter had created something that couldn't be ignored, and that felt like the sweetest possible outcome. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.